Monkey.
Now, in a recent interview, Canelo Alvarez picked Terrence Crawford to win against Errol Spence. The reporter also asked Canelo, do you think Jaron Ennis, could hang in there with Spence and Crawford? And Canelo essentially said, no, I don't think so because Spence and Crawford are just so good. Keep in mind, I'm paraphrasing and not using direct quotes. Now, from what I've seen in terms of predictions of Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, it seems that most of the hardcores and the actual fighters have slightly favored Terrence Crawford, and most of the casuals have favored Errol Spence. Now, that doesn't mean that Terrence Crawford will win and Errol Spence will lose, and vice versa. Let me first establish this, that no one knows who's going to win. Don't listen to someone say, oh yeah, Terrence Crawford is going to win because A, B, and C. Or no, Spence will win because of A, B, and C. No, you don't know. This is a genuine 50-50 fight. For me, it's the most competitive fight in all of boxing. It's the biggest fight in boxing, the most technical fight in boxing. For me, Terrence Crawford is the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, just because he was undisputed and he's come up to 147 pounds and he's got a belt and he's, stopped someone like a Sean Porter in his last fight. Sean Porter was a fighter who was never stopped, prior to fighting Terrence Crawford. He had been dropped prior by Errol Spence. He'd been dropped, by Adrian Broner, but he never been KO'd, and Terrence Crawford was able to do that. Crawford is a unique fighter in the sense that he's such a big puncher for a 147-pounder. He is dangerous for anyone, regardless of how skilled you are, because Crawford is somebody who isn't just a big puncher, he's extremely technical. If you look at the knockout against Kell Brook, he timed Brook coming in. So this is someone who clearly understands timing and distance to an elite level. The only person who probably, in my opinion, has a good understanding of timing and distance to a similar level of Terrence Crawford is someone like a Shakur Stevenson. If you look at Stevenson in his fight against Oscar Valdez, he was able to time Oscar Valdez a few times, and even he knocked down Oscar Valdez. But for me, for my money, Terrence Crawford is the best in terms of timing, and mixed timing with punching power, that's a recipe for disaster. Now, when you look at somebody like Errol Spence Jr., he really impresses me. This is a guy who throws punches from all sorts of angles. He doesn't just go to the head, he goes to the body. He is a very high volume puncher. He's shown in fights that he can be aggressive, such as the Sean Porter fight, the Yordenis Ugas fight, and he's shown in fights like the Danny Garcia fight and the Mikey Garcia fight that he can box at range. I remember when I watched the Sean Porter fight, I was shocked. Errol Spence essentially beat Sean Porter at his own game. He was able to fight on the inside for a sustained period of time and get the better of Sean Porter. He was able to knock him down. I had him winning the fight by a few rounds. So this is a very versatile fighter. He doesn't just throw high volume. He can beat you with a jab, like in the Danny Garcia fight. It wasn't super duper high volume like his normal fights, probably because he was coming off a long layoff. It was relatively low volume, and he was able to easily dispatch Danny Garcia coming off a, big car crash, no tune-up fight, and he made an elite fighter in Danny Garcia look pretty poor. So, throughout their careers, both Errol Spence and Crawford have been phenomenal. Crawford is definitely the bigger puncher, and Spence is probably slightly better at fighting on the back foot, using his jab, moving around the ring. And Spence has got that reach. Spence is a very big welterweight. It will be interesting, to see if Errol Spence's sheer size can, if he can impose that on Terrence Crawford, if it's going to have an impact. Some people have gone as far to say is that Errol Spence is a weight bully. He's fought his whole career at 147 pounds, and some people are saying, well, You know, Spence is such a big welterweight. On fight night, he looks like he's about 175 pounds, 170 pounds, maybe in the high 160s. And maybe that will just be too much for Terrence Crawford. You know, some people say that Crawford is a little bit slow in terms of the first few rounds. From rounds 1 to 3, maybe even 1 to 4, he starts slow. He, you know, is trying to collect data on his opponent and determine, you know, what moves he should make next in order to break down his opponent. Whereas Spence is a much faster fighter. But then on the other hand, if Errol Spence is to go and trade with Terrence Crawford in the way he did against Sean Porter, that might be to his detriment, because, you know, it's all well and good trading with Sean Porter, who self-admittedly was not a big puncher. But when you're trading with the likes of Terrence Crawford, he could really make you pay. So if they were to fight, I believe that Crawford would need to try get on the inside, try to time Errol Spence, and get into a few exchanges, whilst also boxing, switching it up, you know, going in between southpaw and the orthodox stance, you know, mixing it up, because Crawford is got many things that he can utilize to outthink and outbox his opponents. Whereas Spence, I feel like, needs to be very disciplined, and he needs to box on the back foot, and he needs to hit Terrence Crawford down to the body. Now, although Crawford is not weak to the body, when you do hit someone to the body, they lose stamina, they lose energy. And it also sets up shots upstairs to the head, which, even if you can't knock out your opponent or drop him, you could knock him off balance. And that could sway the judges to think, well, he's won the round. You know, he hurt his opponent, or he at least stunned his opponent. Both fighters have good chins. Some people will point to the Ugas fight where Spence was hurt, though Spence's gum shield did fall out and he did lose concentration. And that allowed Yordenis Ugas to hit Errol Spence with a few shots, which rocked Errol Spence and he was on the ropes. I thought that maybe Errol Spence would be dropped, but he was able to recover. So yeah, there will be some questions pertaining to Errol Spence's chin, you know, considering he's come off a car crash, you know, not so long ago. I think it was a couple years ago now. But he hasn't had a lot of fights since. One against Danny Garcia and the other against Yordenis Ugas. So yeah, those were just my quick thoughts on Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. I know a lot of people, you know, have been wondering, you know, who's going to win the fight, or maybe they've been curious on who I favor. I think it's a genuine 50-50 fight. You know, I don't really care who wins. I don't have a horse in the race, as they say. Good luck to both fighters. Let me know in the comment section down below who you favor, Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford. Alright guys, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Peace.